Well, it finally happened. Let me get straight to the point. As we know, the state of Texas is legally, right now, under an invasion. And because of this, their National Guard is being utilized to defend their state in what they're calling an invasion from migrants illegally coming into the state. Now, we know that part, but here's the part that's getting crazy. Many states have said they will support the mission and stand with the Texas National Guard and help defend the borders of Texas. Well, the first governor to actually say what they're going to do, Governor DeSantis out of Florida, will be deploying 1,000 National Guard soldiers on the border with Texas to what he's saying, support and defend from this invasion coming into Texas. So please stick with me in this video because we have a lot of different narratives. We have the actual practical perspective of why Texas needs more reinforcements. And then on the complete opposite spectrum, you have people saying this is the first step for a civil war between the states and the federal government. So let's go ahead and dig into all of this and see why Ron DeSantis is actually deploying his soldiers over into Texas. Now, at the time of making this video, there really hasn't been any major changes as far as Texas and the federal government. Right now, as it stands, the federal government does have jurisdiction over the razor wire that can technically be removed by the federal government. And Texas has already threatened the federal government saying, if you remove any of our razor wire that our National Guard has in place, we're just going to replace it the next day. So we're sort of at a standoff right now. The federal government has not gone over and grabbed any razor wire as it stands, but that's where we are right now. So of course the breaking news is that Ron DeSantis has said he wants to send in 1,000 National Guard soldiers to Texas. Now, I'm going to read a direct quote so we can see what his thinking is and his reasoning as to why he wants to do this. States have every right to defend their sovereignty, and we are pleased to increase our support to Texas as the Lone Star State works to stop the invasion across the border, DeSantis said. Our reinforcements will help Texas to add additional barriers, including razor wire, along the border. We don't have a country if we don't have a border. Okay, so what you need to understand, the federal government is not really acknowledging what's happening in Texas as an invasion. But there's almost a 50-50 split between the states on whether or not Texas has any legitimacy on their so-called invasion. Now, I'm curious, go ahead and leave a comment down below if you think Texas is being invaded or not invaded. Now, understand this, Texas has provided the criteria and evidence as to why they are saying they are under an invasion, and if I'm going to be honest with you, I really am in the camp of, I'm on Texas's side here. When you look at the December 2023 numbers, we're talking about over 100,000 illegal immigrants just coming straight into Texas. Now, the reason why I'm bringing this up, because Ron DeSantis, of course, is in the camp of we need to defend the sovereignty of our nation. And it looks like the troops being sent over to Texas, they will be employing or deploying razor wire. So if I had to make an educated guess, this will most likely be a group of combat engineers, because why not use combat engineers? That is their job, to employ obstacles such as razor wire. I've employed miles of razor wire or barbed wire myself. Now, one thing I do want to point out is we don't have a timeline, or we don't know when the National Guard will be getting into Texas or deploying into Texas. Again, we are now talking in terms of like actual military deployments when we are talking in the context of Texas. This is not like a state helping another state with a natural disaster. We're using different terminology here, and since Texas is saying they are being deployed, they are treating all of this like a war zone. Because again, when it comes to Texas, they've been extremely proactive in how they want to already defend their state, such as already classifying cartel members in the terror category. Now, what's going to be interesting, and I have not been able to find a solid source on how this works legally, I'm not sure how it works when a National Guard enters another territory of where a National Guard is operating. I'm going to assume the National Guard of Florida is going to fall under the command of the National Guard of Texas, because it's Texas who is in the middle of their war or defending from this invasion. My main point is, it's not Florida that's claiming to be in an invasion, it's Texas. So again, you have some weird gray lines on what states are allowed to do or not do, because the whole reason why this happened is because Texas is saying that the federal government is not fulfilling their constitutional duties of protecting the state of Texas. Thus, every state does have the legal right, if they do provide enough evidence, where they can bypass the federal government, not wait for the federal government, and defend their country as needed in terms of military action. I have plenty of videos talking about all of this where the federal government is technically supposed to be assisting any states around the country in military action or times of war or invasion. So again, this is how we got in the first place with Texas. Now, here's what is interesting, and here's a move that other states might be following, and I think this is when we get into the category of this could get a little sketchy. Now, I think Ron DeSantis, what he's doing is, look, we already know he absolutely hates the Biden administration, and he wants to stand with his fellow Republican governors. Among many other Republican governors where we probably will be seeing in the near future sending equipment and soldiers directly to Texas. In the state of Florida, there is a bill that is brewing up that will allow for the National Guard of Texas to expand or move beyond the borders of Texas to supply or aid other military National Guards on the state level. This law also allows for Ron DeSantis to bypass any sort of checks and balances where he can activate his National Guard at any moment's notice, anytime he wants. Look, there are certain criteria for when you can actually summon your National Guard. It's not like every governor can just summon their National Guard, and because of this, they now have their own little militaries. Understand, in the context of Texas, the Lone Star mission has been going on for a while now. This is not like an overnight thing, and the budget for the entirety of the mission has already been set in place. But again, the reason why this could be a little problematic when all of a sudden you have governors from every single state starting to create their own laws where they have their own little mini militias or militaries. Obviously, it only takes one bad governor to take full advantage of this and create his own security forces from these National Guard members. Or worst case scenario, he creates his own little military and nobody can come into his state. Again, I am not implying we are anywhere in this area or that Ron DeSantis wants to do this, but again, you get into a very gray area when Ron DeSantis, the state of Florida, is willing to send his troops over to Texas to support and defend Texas, but also in the same tone, start to brew up your own bill where you are allowing to activate your troops at a moment's notice at any time. And look, typically whenever you hear of the National Guard, it's usually they are doing their weekly training or their summer training, or there is a state of an emergency where a tornado came through and the governor has activated the National Guard. Now, at the time of making this video, there's been no comment from Joe Biden or the White House on this move for Florida to deploy their troops over into Texas territory. I think the federal government, or really the Biden administration, knew this was coming. Again, we are at a point where Joe Biden is almost begging or pleading with his Congress and Senate to create or pass a bill that will allow for Joe Biden to have a cap or to shut down the border at a moment's notice in case things get really bad, like we saw back in December of 2023, where we had over 100,000 illegal immigrants come into the country. The reason why I keep citing the 2023 December stats, we have not got the stats for January yet. But again, I find it rather fascinating that there is an entire narrative around this razor wire. I'm actually kind of glad that the federal government and the states are fighting over razor wire because things can get a lot worse real quick. There hasn't been any news of the federal agents working on the border tampering with any sort of National Guard elements. Again, it looks like that the National Guard in Texas, they are staying isolated in Eagle Pass in a park known as Shelby Park. So look, I don't want to keep rambling. This is where we are at. Ron DeSantis, Florida, is sending in 1,000 troops over to Texas. I am willing to bet we can speculate pretty accurately that there's going to be more states sending in their troops over into Texas, again, to show that governments on the state level want to all stand together and want to have the right to defend themselves and not rely on the federal government to not do their jobs, because that is what Texas is saying could happen to anyone else if it's happening to Texas. But again, as it stands, Texas is in the middle of an invasion with illegal immigrants, but they're still fighting a massive legal battle with the federal government. So we shall see what happens. To me, this is rather crazy, but again, we are not in the world of civil war, in my opinion. If more and more bills pass around the country where states or governors can immediately activate their National Guards in like a very odd or weird way that doesn't have checks or balances, then we can start talking about sketchy scenarios. But as it stands, here's where we're at.